Dylan.
And I'm Keon.
And this is Shush Your Doctor, that podcast where Frosty comes back to kill us because this week we watched The Snowmen.
Written by Stephen Moffat.
Directed by Saul Metzstein. Metzstein? Metzstein.
And aired on December 25th, 2012.
Good old Saul. And his last name.
Call Saul Metzstein.
Pitch, a Doctor Who spin-off featuring Saul Metzstein that's just about him directing stories based on our podcasts.
And based on what you said, because I actually forgot to look up production info, him directing the story wasn't that interesting.
No. Wasn't a lot of interesting stuff in this, except for Moffat was like, I want a epic movie-style Christmas special, like the first half of the season were all supposed to be like big blockbuster style.
Yeah, kind of like
episodes.
Voyage of the Damned. Another Stephen Moffat does Russell T moment that underwhelms. I don't know.
Well, I rather enjoyed this episode.
It was solid.
Actually.
There was some interesting stuff going on.
I think I enjoyed it more than every other episode this season, if I'm being honest.
Wow.
And every subsequent episode that we've watched anyway.
This season is now, if we're putting this in this season, which I guess we are, is on an upward trend. It's going nowhere but up.
Don't hold your breath.
It's getting real good.
I saw on Twitter someone called Series 8 the lowest point of Moffat's career, and I highly disagree with that statement, Mr. Twitter user who I don't remember your handle and I should have written it down. But he was saying it in response to the Decorative Vegetable account, which is why I'm bringing him up, and it's not just some random guy I saw on Twitter who said this.
Well, it could be. I always bring up random stuff I just see online.
Anyway, Moffat was like, I want a big, epic, blockbuster-style Christmas special. And so he wrote
So we got this. No, I get that in a way. This is obviously an hour, which most Christmas specials are, but it feels even longer, just the way it's paced and what goes on. It's almost movie style where you get these highs and lows. There's a lot of downtime in the beginning,
Right. It's the Victorian sensibilities. He got Richard E. Grant because they wanted, as usual, I guess, some famous name to be in the Christmas special, so they got Richard E. Grant.
Yeah, well, wasn't I didn't look up, I just saw this because Amazon shoves this kind of info in your face when you pause the episode. But Ian McKellen.
Yeah, he played the voice of the great...
Right.
At the end. I don't know if we're going to try avoid spoiling it, even though it gets spoiled 10 minutes into the episode if you can read the business card that...
Or if you pause the episode and Amazon shoves the info in your face.
But yeah, so Ian McKellen's the voice of the Great Intelligence. I'm just going to come out and say it. Richard E. Grant plays Dr. Simeon, who serves as the Great Intelligence's sort of human host. Richard E. Grant's played the Doctor himself twice before, once in The Curse of Fatal Death, which we watched, throwback, and once in a web animated short called The Scream of the Shalka, which was supposed to be the continuation of Doctor Who before they rebooted the show and brought it back. So
yeah,
he got retroactively erased from canon.
I wonder if that one random guy online didn't watch this episode or refused to enjoy this one because of the dual character. Remember that one guy we talked about a while ago who I forget what it was, but it was I can't watch any Peter Capaldi episode because he played Caecilius. I refused to accept him as the Doctor.
Wow, missing out on some of the best of the Moffat era by doing that.
I'm surprised, honestly, that they didn't pull some time shenanigans where Caecilius actually was the Doctor and he lost his memories or something.
Yeah, I'm honestly glad they didn't do that. And the explanation we get is way better, so... And, that's about it. Moffat was apparently planning a spin-off featuring the Paternoster gang, i.e. Jenny, Vastra, and Strax, but he didn't have time to do it between this and Sherlock, so he decided you put them in this
as if they were frequently recurring characters. Which
It's
I mean,
fine.
I know. I like the dynamic here. I like it.
I had no problems with it, so... I mean, they've appeared twice.
Yeah, but not in this
This
like,
is 3,
style.
and they appear at least once more in the 11th Doctor's era, and,
Yeah, and,
at least once
gotta
more in the 12th
attest
Doctor's era.
to the power of 3.
Anyway, it's fine because Big Finish picked it up and did the spin-off that Moffat was always aspiring to do, I suppose. Good on you, Big Finish.
Fulfilling people's hopes and dreams without them.
I mean, they actually get Neve McIntosh and Dan Starkey, and I forget who plays
Surprised
Jenny.
you've remembered those names.
Well, I don't remember who plays Jenny, so... Although arguably she's the least interesting of the 3, being the only human in the group.
Yeah, but I mean, not only that. It's like, even if she was some sort of crazy alien, she still would be.
I guess. But yeah, he brought them back, and he wanted to kind of show the Doctor, post Amy and Rory leaving, he's like retired, and apparently Moffat compared the 11th Doctor in this story to the first Doctor at the start of the series and to the 9th Doctor at the start of the reboot, where they're sort of retired from traveling, settled down, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we've watched the next episode after this by now.
Yeah.
So I'll just kind of go into that. I mean, I like the reasoning behind, him coming out of that so-called retirement or whatever. We'll get there
Right.
next week.
Next week.
It feels more solid than like the other. I mean, like the Ninth Doctor, I guess. But
Well,
yeah, I don't know.
I mean,
We'll get
that's
there. We'll get there.
about the extent of the production information. I read something interesting on how they achieved the TARDIS on a cloud was achieved using a fog machine just in the studio.
Whoa.
Just a fog machine on the floor in the studio. So this episode also features the first continuous single take shot that goes from the outside of the TARDIS into the interior of the TARDIS.
Oh,
which
wow.
was
That's actually a pretty big milestone.
Yeah, and was apparently kind of difficult to achieve, but they did it, so...
Not milestones. It's not like, it's not like they set out in 1963. It's like, one day we're going to do this. But, like, that's a big thing, I think. Yeah. Especially with how, like, incongruous some of the shots were in the classic show.
Well, that's because, like, in the reboot, the inside of the TARDIS doors look like the inside of the police box doors, but like in the classic series, the interior doors were like completely different
well, like,
from the police box doors, and it was implied there was like some sort of like disconnect between the interior doors and the exterior doors, so it always just cut from the exterior to interior.
Yeah.
And we never saw shots like even looking into the TARDIS.
And I mean,
from the exterior.
Not only that, the classic show only shows you the TARDIS from one angle. So when they come out and like the shot is reversed, or if it's like straight on, it's like there's some sort of cognitive disconnect. Like, wait, what just happened here?
Well, I mean, speaking of TARDIS from one angle, we get a new TARDIS set in this episode.
Yeah. Well, why don't we touch on the new intro? Because that kind of...
I'm not super down with this title sequence.
Well, this...
Pretty sure is my least favorite.
I mean, at this point, I don't really care. But this brings back the Doctor's face in the intro.
Oh, I don't care about that. That's not the reason why I don't like this intro.
Yeah, no,
I actually kind of like that. I don't know why, if I'm being honest. I guess it serves as kind of an introduction to the show, some sort, which is it's supposed to be because it's the title
you're
sequence.
Going to be looking at for the next 45 minutes.
I'm not super down with this intro. I just feel like it tries to do too much, and it just becomes kind of a mess. Like it seems a little aimless. You know, the intros before this were very concrete. You know,
well, the show's pretty Amy-less now.
Wow.
So
how long have you been waiting to say that?
2 seconds.
The 9th and 10th Doctor's title sequences were like very
safe.
Safe, I guess, but straightforward. Like they were concrete. Like the TARDIS is traveling through the time vortex. That's the title sequence. And the 11th Doctor's first one was like that as well, and his second one, which is just a color tinted version of the first one. You know, the TARDIS goes through the time vortex. Then this one is like
There's like explosions
there's
and
like an
like
explosion,
galaxy-looking things floating around.
The Doctor's face is in the nebula, and then there's like a sun sending out a solar flare, and it's like seems like the concept was a little lost in translation. Yeah, like the classic series too. All the title sequences were like they had a point, except for the Seventh Doctor's title sequence, which I think suffers from the same like.
Well, it's like
problems that this one does.
It's like that thing we talk about. Or we talked about kind of frequently a while ago. It's like all of time is happening all at once, and you're just going through it, and the Doctor's somehow there.
I guess, but it's like it just seems aimless to me. I'm not super down with it. And we get a new title sequence as well, which has the bass turned up to like 20, everything else turned way down. So
yeah, I mean, this is like. End of 2012, going into 2013. This is like when dubstep was like super.
I guess
popular.
This title sequence is the title sequence and the title theme are both supposed to be like dark and edgy.
They're not. They're not. Who said that?
It just feels like that's what they were going for.
So
dark and edgy. I mean, that's what it feels like they're going for in the actual show too, because the Doctor switches to a much darker version of his outfit. It's a lot more subdued than the one he's been using before this.
Well, the 11th Doctor, we said this multiple times, but the 11th Doctor's era is like the darkest and edgiest era of
yeah,
Doctor
but they
Who.
play it off as like really lighthearted, and then right now they're like, we're going to go darker. There's heavy bass in the intro scene, and the Doctor's going to be wearing a dark purple coat instead of his usual tweed. And don't know, doesn't work for me. I like the outfit. The title sequence doesn't work for me. The theme I'm okay with, but Murray Gold never arranged the middle eight, which means the version you're going to hear at the end of this podcast episode is from a fan composer on YouTube. So, thanks.
Wow.
Thanks, Murray. And yeah, but then then we also get a new TARDIS interior going along with that.
Right.
Which again, it feels like they're going for dark and edgy because it's a lot more dimly lit. It's a lot more utilitarian.
Yeah, it's a lot simpler. It's a lot more like pared back than anything in the new show so far.
And that's
Ninth
intentional.
Doctor until now.
That's intentional on the part of Michael Pickwood, who designed it. I don't remember now who said it, if it was Pickwood or Moffat, but they said that the TARDIS in the reboot had been getting progressively absurd.
Busier.
Yeah. Basically, progressively more absurd and further away from what the TARDIS was, which was a machine, so they were trying to get back to that. Like, it's a machine, it's a spaceship kind of vibe, which is why there's a lot of stainless steel and chrome and, like I said, more utilitarian.
Well, I mean, it also, think back to like the first, second Doctor's era, is like the set was pretty simple. I mean, compared to like, what we had in the reboot / new series. So things like, I don't know, the hat stand and like things like that are, I mean, like, would a hat stand...
Classic icons of the TARDIS.
No, but like, would a hat stand out in the TARDIS set that was before this? And
before this? No. In this
because
one?
Of how busy it
probably.
Was. Yeah, that's the thing.
This is basically
these simple, iconic images stand out.
There's like Gallifreyan writing at the top of the TARDIS rotor too.
No, I didn't notice that.
I don't know if it's so obvious in this episode, but it becomes more obvious later on. This is the TARDIS interior we're going to get from now straight through the end of the Moffat era. So with changes, though. With changes. But I rather like this TARDIS interior. I kind of like the symmetry of this interior, too, as compared to like the previous two, which were not symmetrical, whereas this one is extremely symmetrical.
Yeah, in this one, I didn't see a way to get anywhere other than the console room. And I'm sure it's there. I didn't notice it, but
well, there's the stairs going up to the second level, arranged around the time rotor, but there's also in the back two stairways that go down.
Usually, like something in the back, or it's like here's the entrance to the rest of. What's
I mean, the
in
Doctor
here.
went down there in the Bells of St. John, at least.
No,
Don't worry,
I don't
there's an entire story this season called Journey to the Center of the TARDIS, which you may be able to ascertain the plot from the title. That'll show you everything you ever wanted to know about the interior of the TARDIS. But anyway, I rather like this TARDIS interior, and that's about all I have to say on it right now.
Yeah, I mean, again, like the title sequence. I don't necessarily care. I just don't, like, at this point.
Well, the episode begins with a young boy building a snowman. And then the snowman starts to talk to him. And he's like, wow, you're talking to me.
Well, he's pretty antisocial. His overseers or whatever, the adults are like, why don't you go play with the other kids? And he's like, nah, I don't want to play with them.
I just want to build this menacing snowman. And it's like, if you help me, we can achieve anything. Except I can't do Richard McKellen's like grandiose, deep, awesome voice. So you'll just have to settle for mine instead.
Well, the snowman is also kind of reflecting back what it's snow. It's bright. It's reflective.
Right.
And it's kind of reflecting back this kid's thoughts.
I mean, snow can get bright enough to blind you. That's why snowboarders have to wear those like heavily tinted goggles.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the snowman is reinforcing what the kid already thinks, which is that he doesn't want to go play with anyone else.
Right. So he doesn't.
And Simeon's a cool villain, but at the same time, he's kind of just like this sociopathic like guy.
Yeah, but we needed another one of those, to be honest. Actually, there's one more production thing that I wanted to note, which was that Neil Gaiman, this is related to the Great Intelligence reveal, that Neil Gaiman said that it claimed in Doctor Who magazine, in the original drafts of The Doctor's Wife, that he intended House to be the Great Intelligence, but that plot point was lost in subsequent revisions. So.
Yeah, I think we probably brought that up in the episode.
I can't remember if we did.
We did that one with RG.
But it does seem relevant to bring up again here if we did bring it up. Because the big GI is back.
On the business card. Has its own business card now.
Well, so we cut forward to old...
Like 50 years later. Because this is in the 1840s. And we cut to the 1890s. Which is actually really interesting. At the end of this episode, I want to talk about the relationship between this episode and both detective fiction and psychoanalysis, which are also like products kind of the 1890s. Late Victorian era / early Edwardian era. Which aren't that different.
Wow, that's a hot take. But we see this big GI emblazoned on the gates to the building that he's working out of.
Yeah, it looks like the menace of Cobra has spread to England. No.
And there's a GI on this bottle of snow that Simeon's shoveling into this big snow globe.
Yeah, Simeon is like collecting snow. I think there's a line here of like, it shouldn't be snowing this much at this time of year or whatever. But the ground is covered in snow, and Simeon's sort of jarring it up.
Right.
Throwing it into this big like machine that generates like a mini snowstorm.
Yeah. Simeon's invented electricity, the Victorian era, and hasn't thought to just patent this technology while he was at it.
He's being controlled, all right. And there's also, replicas of the snowman from his childhood just kind of
popping up
around.
Yeah. I don't remember exactly when the title sequence occurs, but...
It's like after this, kind of, I think.
It's in here somewhere. We meet Clara, who is working as a bartender.
Question mark? I think I know what's going on with Clara Oswald already.
Do you?
I think.
I'd like to hear your theory, actually.
I have a couple guesses.
At the end of this episode, I would like to hear your theories. I'm not going to confirm or deny them, but I am curious to hear what you're thinking. But yeah, we meet Clara, Victorian Clara. She's as a bartender when we first meet her, but we find out later she's a governess. And
who's like also standing in for the former governess who died. Or according to the girl's dream, is still alive under there, waiting to come back. But we'll get there.
And she goes out of the bar. She's done for the night, and she sees a snowman just pop out of nowhere. And she's like, "That's weird." And the doctor walks by, and she has this weird first interaction with the doctor. The first thing she asks him is, "Did you build that?" Well, I mean, I guess that's a reasonable assumption. There's a snowman, and there's nobody around except for this one guy.
But the doctor's hurrying on. He's like, no, I didn't. Just go away.
Yeah, we get kind of a one-off doctor costume here, which is interesting. It's similar to his costume next week, but it's He's got this very Victorian coat on that's got this big kind of cotton collar.
Looks like many of the interpretations of Ebenezer Scrooge.
Yeah, but Matt Smith described it as Doctor Who meets the Artful Dodger.
I don't even know what that is.
From Oliver Twist.
Oh, I've never read it.
I'm surprised. It's my favorite Charles Dickens novel. Oh, I also found out that part of the reason why Jenna Coleman was cast was because she could talk quicker than Matt Smith. There's a fun fact for you.
Yeah, I mean, I seem to remember from Asylum of the Daleks some stuff about, like, she wasn't supposed to come back, but then she did, and...
Well, the character of Oswin in Asylum of the Daleks wasn't originally intended to be Clara.
Yeah, but then they made these connections.
They made her Clara because Moffat, I guess, saw some sort of opportunity.
And he took it.
That's all I'll say. But so she follows the Doctor because he scans the Snowman, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm not going to be involved in this." She follows the Doctor. He gets in a carriage and he's driving away, and the carriage has got like a telephone line to Vastra, I guess. She's like, "You like her, don't you?" And he's like, "Well, I don't travel anymore." She's like, "Oh, come on."
Yeah, it turns out Sherlock Holmes and Watson are based on the exploits or like the influence within London of Vastra and Jenny.
Yeah, and because they confront Simeon, and Simeon's like, "How would the public take it if Conan Doyle's creations were inspired by?" And he lifts up Vastra's veil, and you kind of think he's gonna say like lizard woman,
yeah,
or like a lizard, but he just says a woman,
right? And that's actually really interesting. I want to touch on this more at the end. Like in the history of detective fiction, woman detective slash main character, because the detective is almost always a main character.
Yeah,
is in some ways necessarily writing against the tradition of it being a man. So like Melody Malone is not just a woman, and that's just it. That's like against a certain tradition, whether it means to be or not. But anyway.
And then he mentioned something about Jenny being her assistant. It is Jenny, right? I'm not confusing her with the Doctor's daughter, Jenny, am I? I'm sure it's Jenny.
I don't know. I mean, now that you...
I'm second guessing myself now.
Yeah, now that you say that, like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's Jenny, okay. Just wanted to confirm that. Mentions Jenny being her assistant. She's like, "Excuse me, she's my wife." So, I don't know what priest in Victorian England officiated a wedding between a lizard person and a human, but...
Well, I mean, not only that, but two women.
Maybe it's just a common law marriage. Or maybe they're just like...
They're probably just saying that, or like, you know...
I mean, the important thing is that they consider that they're married, so who cares what anybody else thinks, my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, and if you take that, like, even further, or maybe just as it is, like, who even then cares about, like, the institution of marriage?
Well, clearly not Simeon, because he seems unfazed by this. Simeon seems to be rather progressive for his time, although he does call her out for being a woman, which is interesting.
I mean, I don't think this is, in terms of Simeon, a matter of being either progressive or conservative. I think he has world domination on his mind. Because apparently the entire human race is about to be wiped out on Christmas.
Yeah. I was going to say there is kind of a...
This is Christmas Eve, by the way.
It's an interesting sort of foreshadowing bit, although a little perhaps obtusely or obliquely, that Simeon calls Vastra out for being a woman rather than a lizard person, in that clearly he accepts a lizard person as being a possibility, probably because he's talking with a great outer space consciousness in his free time. With telepathic snow, so he's probably accepted that lizard people would be a possibility. I think that's an interesting kind of point that's brought up here. So she follows the Doctor, and he's like, "Well, I'm going to have to erase your memory with the memory worm." He's like, "Strax, get the memory worm."
I really like this scene. The humor of this actually really landed.
Well, the humor of Strax always lands for me. I just love Strax, because first he's like, "Be quiet, boy," and the Doctor's like, no. And he's like, "Be quiet, girl." And then the Doctor's like, "Yeah, there's only one gender on Sontar. They're all clones." He's like, "Do not talk about my reproductive system in front of the girl."
he tells Strax to go get the memory worm. And Strax comes back and his memory's wiped. He touched the memory worm.
Doctor's like, if you touch the memory worm, your past hour will be erased from your memory. And Strax comes back and he's like, all right, what do you want me to do? And the doctor's like, Strax, you're supposed to get the memory worm. And he's like, what? I don't remember that.
And they kind of have the same conversation again, but then the doctor eventually is like, fine. And he goes and gets the memory worm himself.
Well,
he puts on the oven mitts.
We cut forward, I guess 20 minutes, and because he loses the memory worm, and Strax is underneath the carriage trying to get the memory worm. He's like, I've almost got it. I've got it. And he's like, help, I seem to have been run over by a carriage. And then Clara's like, these are the gauntlets, are they? She picks up the
oven mitts.
The oven mitts, and the doctor's like, damn it, Strax. But he tells Clara he's going to erase her memory, and she's like, okay. And he's like, why aren't you running away? And she's like, why would I run away? I mean, I'm not scared. The doctor's like, wow, okay. And the doctor decides not to erase her memory and tells her just to not come find him anymore.
And Clara here, and this kind of informs my theory, is not very taken aback by these supernatural occurrences.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have some thoughts
I like this version of Clara somewhat more than the version we get in Bells of St. John. Because they are somewhat different. This Clara is a lot more independent and more of a go-getter, I guess is the term that people use.
The one next week is, to some extent, after she gets the internet fed into her mind. But, I mean, whatever.
So, she follows the doctor. The doctor kind of jumps and gets the ladder, and then she jumps and gets the ladder, and they climb up, and the TARDIS is just sitting on a cloud.
Yeah, it's done really interestingly. The top of the screen looks like it just leads toward this endless abyss, but it's really just on top of a tree.
Yeah.
And they climb up the ladder, and there's a staircase, invisible staircase that no one can see, which that's what invisible means.
Mm-hmm.
And the TARDIS is up there, like you mentioned.
The doctor is chilling in the TARDIS.
Doctor in the TARDIS.
Doctor Who.
And Clara,
she knocks on the door.
I keep wanting to say Jenna instead of Clara because she's played by
Jenna Coleman.
Louise Coleman / Jenna Coleman.
Yeah.
But she knocks on the TARDIS door, and there's also kind of a funny scene where, she runs around the TARDIS, and the doctor's going around. She turns the corner, and the doctor turns the other corner and sees her.
And then she runs down the staircase. Cut to the next day, where she returns to, I guess, the manor house that she works at as a governess. And
she sort of, like we mentioned before, she sort of replaced this other governess who fell into the lake and froze
drowned.
over. Not the lake, the
pond.
The pond.
And she drowned.
There's a pun with the pond in
this
episode. I forgot what it was.
Don't worry, I remember.
Okay.
So, before that, we get a scene where Simeon visits the guy who owns this house and gives him a business card. And this is the first time you see the words "Great Intelligence" spelled out if you read the business card that Simeon gives to this guy.
I didn't pause it to read it.
You don't even need to pause it because it kind of lingers on the business card for quite a bit.
Paying attention, but yeah, there you go. And this, the two kids who live here, one of them has been having prophetic dreams. Which also goes back to this psychoanalytic thing, but whatever.
Well, this is I got a very Mary Poppins vibe from Clara here. I don't know.
Kind of. I mean, she's a governess who brings these supernatural, probably more deadly than Mary Poppins. But she's this governess who brings this supernatural stuff to this family's life.
Yeah, and she's, I don't know, just her her interactions with the kids and the way she plays it, her mannerisms, I guess, all reminded me of Mary Poppins. So
yeah, and there's that scene later on where she flies on an umbrella. No.
But they do use the umbrella. The doctor gives her an umbrella. So Clara goes to seek out. There's a search and seek at the same time. Seek out the doctor because when she was with the doctor, they got confronted by snowmen. The doctor told her to imagine them melting, and they melted. And she thinks that the same
exploded into water.
She thinks the same thing is happening with the kid. She's imagining that the governess is in the lake, so the telepathic stuff is making it happen. So she wants the doctor's help with the kid, and they're given the one-word test. She's given the one-word test by Vastra.
Yeah. Well, there's a scene where she tries to go back to the TARDIS and just like makes a fool out of herself.
Yeah, because
I
the
don't
lad is
remember
gone.
if that's after this or before, but whatever.
It's before
somewhere.
because she starts calling for the doctor in the sky, and that's when Jenny shows up. It's like, make a fool of yourself, and then she takes her to Vastra. And Vastra asks her all these questions. She's only allowed to answer in one word, and it's like, why do you want us help? And it's like, why would the doctor help you?
So
kindness.
The thing of like what this test is I think either Vastra or Jenny says that the truth like expresses itself in one word at a time or something like that.
Jenny says truth is singular, lies are complex.
Yeah, which this is also another scene that I want to touch back on at the end.
Yeah, as soon as I heard her say truth is singular, I was like, Keon's going to want to talk about that. But yeah, this is where there's, I don't know if it's so much a pun as much as a plot point, which is like explain in one word why the doctor would help you. That encapsulates everything you need the doctor to help you with and everything that's going wrong and that the doctor needs to do. And we don't see Clara's answer, but Vastra calls up the doctor and is like, she passed the one-word test, and the doctor's like, oh, yeah, sure. Nobody passes the one-word test. It was just a waste time. And then Vastra's like, well, she answered pond. And the doctor's like, what?
I liked this. I liked this. But at the same time, let him go, Moffat.
Not only that, but next week as well.
Yep. That we'll get there next week. For you, like, have
a listener,
couple. I mean, hopefully, like 20 minutes for us, 20 to 30. But let him go, Moffat. Let him go.
Moffat does Russell T. Big Russell T. So every time I say Russell T, I think of Mr. T.
Yeah, Mr. T. Well, I mean, people. When you say Russell T, it's almost like T is his last name, but it's not. It's his middle initial. I don't even know what the T stands for, honestly.
That's a 2I.
Tyler. Because Rose Tyler, I mean...
Great.
Well, Rose Tyler is definitely like a play on Russell T. Because Russell T, there was a show that I forget what it was called, but it came out in the late 90s, that he was something. It's the name of the show is the name of the town that it takes place in, and he was also the biggest like creative mind, like director, writer. Did many roles for that show. And there's a character named Rose something with a T in that, and who's like his kind of voice within the show.
Well, that's interesting. Let her go, Russell T. The doctor goes to investigate the pond, and somehow gets convinced to go inside by Clara, so he goes inside. And then the pond wakes up, and it's the governess as an ice woman. She's attacking.
Right, this ice form is like the next evolution of the Snowmen, because they realize that snow isn't as powerful as ice, or I forget what it was.
Forgot this whole scene. Before the doctor goes to Clara, he goes to visit Simeon in the Great Intelligence Institute.
Oh, right. He pretends to be Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah. And he tries to make all these deductions, and they're all wrong.
Yeah.
Which reminds me of this Conan Doyle wrote a very silly short story called How Watson Learned the Trick, which is Watson trying to do the Sherlock method on Sherlock in the morning. Then Sherlock's like, you got every single deduction wrong, Watson.
Well, there's always, well, not always, but there's most of the time, like the incorporation of like Sherlock, he asks Watson like, well, what do you think? And he comes up with all this like bogus stuff. And then Sherlock's like, no.
I mean, the Hounds of the Baskervilles, Watson basically does all the legwork in that one. Just Sherlock shows up at the end to take credit and is like, wow, Sherlock, you dick. Sherlock was a dick. I don't know why people idolize Sherlock, but he was kind of a prick.
Yeah.
He was also addicted to cocaine, if you didn't know that.
Well, the later Sherlock Holmes stories go off the rail in actually a lot of interesting ways, and a lot of this, I mean, if you want to incorporate like the author and stuff, a lot of this is like Doyle like being kind of pissed at like people liking Sherlock Holmes as much as they did.
Because no one was buying his other work. I guess because
he has other work.
He has a book called The Lost World. Ironically, the same title as the Jurassic Park sequel that nobody bought because I think this is my theory. People would have bought his work if he hadn't just killed off Sherlock Holmes. Like, I think people were just pissed at him and like formed some sort of pseudo boycott of his work. I don't think it was that his work so much is just underappreciated as he seemed to think it was. But
I don't know. I mean,
I don't really know. There's just a theory I have.
Yeah, what were we talking about in the episode? Already, the Doctor pretends to be Sherlock Holmes, and Simi is like, even I know that Sherlock Holmes is a fictional character.
Yeah.
But this brings up, I mean, the Sherlock Holmes is like hugely influential, especially in British like literature or just stories.
Right.
The Doctor is there are many connections between the Doctor and Sherlock Holmes, especially now in the Moffat era. Because
wow, I wonder why.
No, but I mean, but even going back to the beginnings of Doctor Who, those connections are there in some ways.
I'm sure there's a reference to Sherlock Holmes and Talents of Wing Chiang as well.
Well, not even direct references, but also direct references, but also like just similarities, I guess. But anyway,
but yeah, that's when he learns that there's some sort of being controlling Simeon who wants the Ice Woman. That's when he goes to the house. He's like, the Ice Woman's the next stage in the evolution because it's DNA captured in ice form. He's like, that's total bogus, but you know what? I'll go along with it for the story.
Well, ice is also like harder to destroy than snow, I guess. I don't know.
I guess.
She also seems a lot more mobile and deadly than the Snowmen. This is the form. She takes the form of the governess who was in the frozen
drowned
lake.
in the lake.
Yeah.
That pond that froze over.
Yeah, we keep calling it a lake, yet it's in their backyard.
It's tiny. Yeah.
Which their backyard is admittedly huge, especially for England.
Well, this guy clearly has a lot of money.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And he's extremely upset to hear that Clara has a man friend because the doctor says, her man friend, we were just upstairs kissing, and he's upset about this because he was clearly flirting with Clara earlier in the Victorian way where it's like not really flirting, but...
And they do kiss later on, and I was just like, here we go again.
Buckle up, boys!
Here we freaking go again. Moffat does Russell T.
Moffat does Russell T. Buckle your seatbelts, boys.
So, the Doctor, like, creates a barrier.
Well, no, actually, Jenny's the one who creates a barrier. It's some sort of barrier grenade.
Oh, yeah. The Doctor just, like, enforces it or whatever.
He just expands it later on to put him and Clara on the other side of the barrier with the governess.
Because there's kind of a chase scene. Things get deadly.
Yeah, they want to lead the governess away from the snowman, so the Doctor and Clara go up to the TARDIS. The Doctor takes an umbrella, and Clara deduces that he took the umbrella because she wouldn't have been able to reach the ladder, and he wanted her to bring the ladder down, and because he wanted to see how capable she was, I guess. And they go up, and this is when we get the first view of the TARDIS, and this is when we get that unbroken shot from the outside to the inside, is the first view of this TARDIS. So right now, we follow Clara into the TARDIS. Yeah.
And she's surprised, as all companions are.
Yeah.
Or, well, actually, there are moments when, I think in the classic show...
Rory wasn't surprised. If you'll remember, Rory went in and he's like, oh, she's dimensionally transcendental. And the Doctor's like, wow, spoiling the fun. He's like, I read up on all the latest scientific theories.
Well, Dodo didn't have anything. She just came in the TARDIS and was like, let's go. Man, yeah, I wonder if there's any fan fiction out there of, like, Dodo had all these, like, time travel and supernatural adventures, and that's why she's totally accepting of the TARDIS.
Who cares?
Maybe it's Big Finish doing that.
It's
Who knows?
Dodo. Who cares?
I don't know. You know, in my removal from, like, in the distance that's passed since we had Dodo on the show, I've really, like, warmed up to Dodo as a companion.
You'll go back and you'll rewatch one of her episodes. You'll be like, why did I ever warm up?
I do want to redo the Monoids as or what was that called, the Monoids? I don't remember. No, that was the Ark. The Ark. I want to redo the Ark as our part of, like, this ongoing endeavor to, like, go back to some classic episodes
to revisit everything.
Yeah, but anyway. Clara, I keep wanting to say Jenna, but whatever.
You got it, Clara. We have 2.5 seasons of this.
Clara runs back in the TARDIS and she's like, it's smaller on the outside.
The Doc's like, well, that's a new one.
But this also goes back to like negation, and like the psychoanalytic thing of like bigger on the inside calls to mind its opposite, so like smaller on the outside. But whatever. Well,
I mean, there's only so many ways you could say it's bigger on the inside.
Well, who knows?
It's more spacious on the interior. But the Ice Woman grabs Clara while she's investigating the TARDIS, and they fall.
Drags her off the ledge.
Yeah, they fall off the cloud, and there's this horrifying thump. You see Vastra and Jenny inside the house, and you hear this horrifying thump, and they look out the window, and Clara's body's just lying there. And I was like, wow, that's pretty dark. Yeah,
so there's this shot of them falling into London, basically. And until now, I didn't get how high up the TARDIS was. Because when it's in the tree...
Was it high enough that you were wondering, like me, why the Doctor didn't just catch Clara in the TARDIS like he did with River that one time? Because that's what I was wondering.
That didn't even cross my mind, but... Yeah, I don't know. When you get it in the tree, it doesn't seem as high up.
Well, they go up the staircase, and they go really high, and Clara's like, how are we so high? And the Doctor's like, oh, clever staircase. It's bigger on the inside. So...
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering why the Doctor didn't catch Clara in the TARDIS pool like he did River when she jumped out that window in Day of the Moon. Throwback. Or when she flew out of that spaceship in Time of the Angels. Throwback. It's a time machine, so could have just really easily done that, but instead he just lets her die.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I guess we're counting her on the
She is dead.
Yeah, and this also goes back to my theory that I've been hinting at. And I'm going to explain at the end of this.
I guarantee whatever you come up with is probably...
It's probably going to be wrong, but I mean, I think I'm on the right track.
I was going to say it's probably better than what actually happens.
I think I'm on the right track, honestly. I don't think it's complete.
So... The Doctor asks Clara if he saves the world, if she'll come away with him, because they have this technology that I guess can bring people back to life for a couple minutes.
Yeah, for a while. For a while.
And so the Doctor just goes to the Great Intelligence. He
confronts, because he sort of uncovers, it's been...
before he goes, he tells Simeon that the Ice Woman's in this lunchbox he has.
Yeah, and he holds it up, and there's a map of the London Underground on it.
Yeah.
And that comes back later, but in this moment I was like, did they just grab this thing like off a table or like this London Underground themed lunchbox? No, but I mean like in terms of the making of the show.
No, I think it's supposed to be a definitive, like I think it's supposed to have a purpose in that it's the Doctor telling the Great Intelligence about the London Underground that the Great Intelligence then uses to try and invade in Web of Fear.
Yeah, no, I mean like Doctor Who isn't so shoddily made anymore that they would just like have something, that they would just show you this map for like no reason or whatever.
Right.
And it was never that shoddily made.
Yeah.
Maybe at times. I don't know.
The Doctor visits the Great Intelligence, tells him about the London Underground, and then gives Simeon the box, and then Simeon opens the box thinking the Ice Lady's in there, but surprise, it's the memory worm, which then erases Simeon's memory. So the Doctor's like, without Simeon, the Great Intelligence doesn't have a body, but then the Intelligence is like, ha, you thought you got me, but I'm stronger than that. And the Doctor's like, well, that was a mistake.
Well, I think it's that without Simeon, the Intelligence's voice regresses. Not regresses, but it was using Simeon to like mask its real voice, which is that of a child.
Yeah.
So it's this childlike entity, which is, I guess,
well, because it was Simeon as a child was when it was created, which is why the Doctor reverts it back to its true voice, which is the child Simeon talking, because it was just the thoughts of the child Simeon being reflected back at him.
Yeah, and the Doctor says that it's just like an angsty kid or whatever.
Then the Great Intelligence is like, oh, yeah, no, I'm not. I'm basically an all-powerful, godlike being. But then it's defeated through the power of love. Literally, because Clara basically dies, and the emotional anguish it causes the rest of the family at the house causes them all to have similar thoughts also because it starts raining, of everything turning to water. So the great intelligence, snow, just vaporizes.
And there's a scene where Clara or Shot, sheds a tear or whatever.
Yeah. It's like the tears that Clara was shedding. The power of love is a curious thing. But the doctor's
also
like, well...
a song.
Yeah.
By
That was actually... No, by Huey Lewis in the News.
Oh.
That was a line from the song that I just quoted.
Oh, really? I
Yep.
don't know.
But the doctor...
I haven't heard the song. Or I probably have heard the
Yeah,
song.
you have. You've watched Back to the Future. It was in Back to the Future.
Right. Yeah.
So...
Oh, right. There was that entire thing of, Huey Lewis and the controversy of that. Yeah, I forgot about that.
So the doctor goes back to the house. Clara dies, and as she's dying, she says, "Run, you clever boy, and remember." And the doctor's like, wow, maybe the universe does grant wishes. Because there's been a whole thing through the whole story that the doctor was like, I travel and I save the universe over and over and over again, and what does the universe give me? Nothing. Which, again, doesn't make sense, because like I said last week, there are a million ways they could have gotten out of Amy and Rory's right out.
Just let it go. Just move
I'm
on.
going to look past that for the sake of this story. Look at this story independently. And the doctor's like, the universe never gives back. And I'm like, okay. The doctor seems to be depressed. This sounds like a symptom of depression, doctor. But then Vastra says, the doctor says something like, oh, interesting. And he finds out that her middle name was Oswald, Clara Oswald Oswald. And he's like,
by looking at her grave.
Yeah. Because they go to her funeral and he's like, wow.
And, I mean, that's another Stephen Moffat moment is like looking at someone's grave.
Throw back to last week. And the doctor decides he's going to go look for Clara. And he leaves. And Vastra's like, I guess the universe does grant wishes. And then we cut to, the end is like a tease. We see modern day Clara at the Clara gravestone. She's like, I don't believe in ghosts. And she doesn't look directly at the camera, but she looks like over the cameraman's shoulder. And it ends.
Yeah. The doctor now goes on this journey to...
Which really seems like he just, minor spoilers for next week, goes to a monastery and sits there for hundreds of years.
Well, it's kind of hinted at here, but it's done more so at the end of the next episode, Bells of St. John. But he wants to figure out who Clara is. Yeah. At the end of Bells of St. John, he's like, all right, I need to find out who you are. And that's his coming out of I don't know, retirement, I guess.
Depression. Yeah, because there's this key moment in the story actually where the doctor looks in a mirror right when he gets to the governess, the house where Clara is being a governess, and he looks in the mirror and he's surprised to see that he's wearing a bow tie, which is like a big thing because it's his return to form. Because if you didn't notice, up until that point, he'd been actually wearing a regular tie on his suit.
I didn't notice.
And then that moment was like he had swapped to a bow tie, which was like a traditional 11th Doctor outfit, which is why he was surprised. Like, I didn't even realize I'd put it on. He's like, I guess some things never change. And that's when he says bow ties are cool for the first time this half season.
Well, he says it like bow ties are cool. Like he's reaffirming it to himself.
Yeah.
So I think this is a solid episode.
Yeah, I really like this episode.
Interesting things going on. My Clara theory, I guess,
hit me with
is that she's being reincarnated, but the reincarnations are not in order.
All right, interesting theory.
Does that make sense? She's her bodily, the chronology doesn't match up with her mind, how the order in which her mind is being reincarnated through these different bodies. So it's kind of like a River Song type character, ish.
Interesting theory. You'll have to hold out to find out the real resolution to this.
Because that's why, I mean, some hints towards this is she knows more. She seems to know more in this than she does in next week's episode. Yet this one takes place 100-something years before next week. Yeah,
but that could also be chalked up to this being a different Clara.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think there are hints towards this idea that she's being reincarnated out of order.
You shall have to wait and see.
Yeah, could just watch all the episodes now. I've never gone ahead in this podcast. I've never watched ahead to the next week before recording the episode. And I don't know if I ever will.
I don't know if there's any benefit, really.
If you're just really excited to watch the episode.
I guess.
mean, sometimes I've been really excited and I just like watch it right after we record. Like Rose. I did that for Rose. Because I was ready to like actually watch something after 16 weeks of audios. But anyway, I mean, if you don't have anything else to say, let's jump into this discussion of like the role of detective work, detective fiction, and also Freudian kind of stuff in this episode. I mean, like I mentioned before, these things kind of came around at the same time, independently, but like also weirdly, relatedly, in a way. But you know, there's that scene where, and detective fiction is often, well, either praised, but I think mostly criticized for this. And this is Doyle's model. What, you know, Doyle didn't create the detective genre, but he popularized it. And really, he
based it on Edgar Allan Poe.
He was really, a lot of what he was taking from was Edgar Allan Poe, and doing like less interesting things with it. But well, that's not really true.
But I guess, quote, popular fiction, unquote, in general typically does that, in my opinion, tends to dumb things down. I don't know.
I guess.
Which is why there's this differentiation now, I guess, between, quote, literary fiction, unquote, and then, like, everything else.
Popular fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a distinction that maybe shouldn't exist.
I don't particularly care for it.
But yeah, Doyle definitely, like, popularized these things. And there's this idea, like, within that popularization, within like this late Victorian period of like, and this is why people have been critical of Sherlock Holmes and the trends that it caused, of like, you know, there's a case in Sherlock Holmes in most of the stories, actually a surprising amount. It's kind of impressive how he did this, of like, you can figure it out. It all comes down to a neat case. It's explained at the end.
I mean, that's kind of why he became popular, really.
Yeah, and the components of the story, you know, the components of the case that Sherlock for sure is going to explain at the end are all there for you to solve, and it's kind of isolated, self-contained. Why not? I'll just brag. I've solved most of the Sherlock Holmes short stories without reading the ending. Most of them. The hardest one was, I don't know if you remember, the one where like it's a father and son and there's like a murder at a lake in the forest or something like that.
I don't remember.
I couldn't solve that one.
There's a few that you can't straight up can't figure out. The one, there's two that are very similar. One has a jewel being hidden inside a bust of Napoleon, and another one has the jewel being hidden inside a chicken. And they're the same outlines of stories.
Yeah.
They're identical, in fact.
Yep.
But one of them, you don't get told like a critical piece of information that would be necessary to figure out the resolution to the plot. So one of those two, I don't remember which, you're not able to figure it out.
Yeah, some of them you just can't.
Because it's like information that Sherlock already knows, because he's like, oh, I read in the paper 3 months ago that this thing happened. But you as a reader wouldn't know that.
Yeah, which that's actually doing something really interesting. But then we get this moment of like, you know, the truth being contained like within one word. And if we connect this back to you know, Freud and psychoanalytic stuff that was also popular at the same time, or coming into its own at the same time, is like Freud gives us the idea that and I mean, let's not read Freud as like anything medical. Let's read this as like literary, which is what most people do with it now. Regardless of what Freud was trying to do with his work, which I don't even know. But I mean, Freud was hugely interested in fiction and literature. But anyway, he gives us the idea in the uncanny, and also I think in parts of interpretation of dreams, of like words necessarily evoking not only their meaning, but the opposite of their meaning. And Freud always has these like words, and this is actually easier to do in German, so the translation is kind of weird. But the uncanny, the unconscious, unconscious, opposites, or like the absence of. Well, the unconscious is like the total absence of anything you can understand unconscious. But yeah, and that's
well, it's a fun little aside. While you try to figure out where you were going with that, Sherlock Holmes meets Sigmund Freud in a pastiche that someone wrote shortly after Conan Doyle died. It's called The 7% Solution. I've never read it, but Sherlock meets Sigmund Freud. And I read the plot synopsis on Wikipedia, and Sigmund Freud psychoanalyzes Sherlock, and turns out Moriarty is not real. He's like a figment of Sherlock's like childhood fears metastasized into like a being that Sherlock is convinced exists, but turns out the real Moriarty is just like was his math teacher as a kid or something. So yeah, that's the thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but I mean, like this idea that the truth is singular maybe doesn't like work, or like doesn't. Later detective fiction actually plays with this idea of, well, I actually just coincidentally read Petals of Blood, which is a novel by Kenyan writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o. The last one he actually wrote in English, I think. And that's a story about that's a story that takes like this detective framework, and don't worry, I'm gonna connect this all back to
I'm
what
not
we
worried.
watched. That's a story that takes this detective framework and does like this sort of psychoanalytic maybe thing with it, of like turning it on its head. The detective in that story isn't the main character. The case isn't neat. It's a murder mystery, but it doesn't follow any of the conventions of what we think of as a murder mystery. It's the answer that they're looking for is brought out not by like focusing in, but by bringing the story out, by like de-isolating it in much a way similar to how psychoanalysis makes all these connections outward, or says that something as seemingly strange as like words mean what they mean and the opposite of what they mean. But that's also connected to like really this thing we were talking about before, but also like the 13th Doctor is that, the character like Melody Malone or the 13th Doctor isn't like in isolation. It's not just that the 13th Doctor is a woman because that's just what it is, but like in a way, whether the intention was to write against like having 12 male doctors or not, in a way it's reacting towards that like tradition. That makes sense.
I mean, I can see that. I mean, detective fiction for a long time was a strictly male, not written, but the protagonists were pretty much male. Yeah, the earliest example of a female detective I can think of right now is Miss Marple from Agatha Christie.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if there were any... I'm sure there were before her, but I'm not sure if there were any that as popular as her before her. No, I mean, going back to the truth is singular and the relation to detective fiction, I mean, you can play against that while still falling into the tropes, I guess, of detective fiction. We'll spoil the ending of Murder on the Orient Express, but like the whole point of that book, of the mystery in that book at the end of the story, is that there's a simple solution to the murder.
Julius Caesared him.
Well, I mean, like the whole point of that book, if you've read it, which I have, like when you get to the end, the point is that there is a simple, straightforward, singular solution to the crime, but it doesn't. It's like not the truth. Like what actually happened is incredibly complex and obtuse, and like not clear, and figuring it out from the facts is like not exactly straightforward, but the whole novel plays like a straightforward mystery novel. Poirot interviews the suspects, he examines the crime scene, but then the truth is not singular. It's this incredibly complex narrative that like it is more complicated than the solution that would seem to be most obvious.
Yeah, and I mean I haven't read it, but maybe it's like, I don't know, you come up with a Sherlock Holmes, you read a detective story and it's a Sherlock Holmes style one where like there is, the answer, and you can find the answer at the beginning if you follow the clues closely enough or whatever. And in the end, there's comes at you with like, well, what if that wasn't my gun or something like that?
Murder on the Orient Express plays with that too, because the resolution to that plot like requires you to know things like outside the scope of the story about this whole other murder that occurred like years before the one that occurs in the book. But like at the end of the book, like that's kind of the point that it's making, is like if you were just a detective who just happened upon the scene, you would pick the easy, straightforward solution because you wouldn't have any of these other facts. And you wouldn't be able to make all these connections that Poirot makes and make this and ascertain the truth of the matter, which is this way more complicated and interconnected idea than what supposedly happened.
Yeah, and that's what the detective that kind of mirrors the detective in Petals of Blood, which again I'm just bringing up because I just finished it. But he wants to know he wants to figure out the murder, and the guy he's interviewing, the main character Munira, is like, well, I have to tell you the story that starts like 12 years ago. Right. And he's like, I don't want to hear the story that starts 12 years ago. I want to know who killed the people. Yeah.
But I guess my point was just that you can play against the type that truth is singular, but still fall into the tropes of detective fiction while doing so.
Yeah. But I mean, I wonder what that says about like female detectives, because I want to bring this into like a meta sense. And the 13th Doctor, I mean, because like you can think of, I don't know. I mean, do people think of the 13th Doctor? And I kind of want to touch on the gender thing also because of Vastra and that line is like, oh,
you're a woman,
right? Can you think of like, do people think of the 13th Doctor within like isolation, or do they say like, it doesn't matter whether the previous Doctors were male or not, the 13th Doctor is whoever she is?
I mean, that's the thing, is that I think people think they're looking at her in isolation, but I don't think they really are. I think, every discussion I see, predominantly on Reddit, but elsewhere too, people tend to start their opinion, they'll say something like, oh, I don't care that the Doctor's a woman, but the writing is weak. Or I don't care that the Doctor's a woman, but, Jodie Whittaker is really great in the role. Or they'll say like, well, I didn't want the Doctor to be a woman, but Jodie Whittaker is doing a really good job. They always preface, whether it's in the positive, I didn't want her to be a woman, or in the negative, I don't care that she's a woman. They always do tend to preface their discussion with that. And I think that I think people feel like if they say, well, I don't care that she's a woman, they're indicating that they're looking at her in isolation, which I think it actually shows the opposite. It shows that you actually are looking at her from the lens of, well, she's not what we've had before. To a lesser extent, people did this with Peter Capaldi, because in the reboot, nobody had really seen an older Doctor like that. So they're like, well, I don't care that Peter Capaldi's old, but, I think that within the show, I think Chibnall did a good job of basically never playing up her gender at all, and treating her in isolation. There's a few lines that you would expect. There's one line in one story which is like, this would be a whole lot easier if I was a man, but I'm a woman, so I'm going to have to deal with it. Because it's a story where they're hunting witches, and she's like, I'm a woman, like, this is an explicit disadvantage for me in this episode. But that's like really basically the only time it comes up in the whole series, and I think Chibnall does a good job of treating it in isolation, that this is just it's another incarnation of the character, but she's her own character, right?
And I mean, I think that's a great way to like approach it on the show. And at the same time, and this might sound like hypocritical, is like, I think when you want to maybe analyze the 13th Doctor's episodes, which we'll do in like a year, or well, not analyze, but like if you want to touch on this, you're necessarily going to be speaking to that change, or
I mean,
like, I don't know.
Interesting thing is that we can touch back on this next season when we get Missy, without talking about Missy's relation to the series as a whole. People, when she was introduced, were, I guess, having an overarching villain who is a woman. People were like, well, I don't care that she's a woman, even though at her conception and her appearance in the show indicated that she was not a character we've seen before. People would still tend to be like, well, I don't care that she's a woman, simply because the general trend of overarching villains in the show to this point had been male. So it may not necessarily, what I'm saying is, it may not necessarily be that the Doctor swapped genders in that aspect, but more so that, not even the fact that it's the same character, just that it's different, I guess. But
yeah,
we'll
I mean, I don't know. I just feel like treating this in isolation, or treating these kind of things in isolation, is like kind of strange because of this thing where it's like maybe it's necessarily not isolated, because whether it means to be or not, it's like within and also against like this trend.
Well,
But whatever.
Treating it in isolation is also a little weird as an ending point here, because I feel like people are overtly trying to appear like not sexist by trying to intentionally treat her in isolation. Except, I know we've done it on this show. Every doctor we come into, we always talk about, at least in their first episode, their portrayal compared to the previous doctor, and that's a thing people have been doing consistently for the entire show, is comparing people doctors' portrayals between each other. And I think that because the 13th Doctor's a woman, people are trying to shy away from that, I guess, for fear of looking like they're sexist. But I think that you can compare her portrayal to the other doctors without bringing her gender into it at all. But
well, I don't know. I'm more confused now than when we first started talking about it. So there you go.
Well, I don't have anything else to say on this story.
Yeah, neither do I.
Oh, except that on Clara's gravestone, she was born on November 23rd, which I thought was a nice little Easter egg. I don't know if you noticed that.
I don't even know what that is. That a clue to who she is?
That's the date that Doctor Who aired on, was November 23rd.
Oh, well, okay. I mean, what is the connection between? Maybe this is going back to some psychoanalytic nodal point nonsense, but like, not nonsense. I don't think it's nonsense. But yeah, whatever.
Actually, I do have one more thing I wanted to say. The wiki considers this an origin story for the Great Intelligence, but I don't think it's played that way at all, and I disagree with that assessment. I don't know what you think, but because my interpretation of the story was always that the Great Intelligence existed and then used Simeon.
Yeah, it
as
existed
a vehicle.
Like before. We don't see its origin, and it's a child, but we don't see its origin in the episode.
The wiki, and I assume other people, claim that this is an origin story for the Great Intelligence, and that Simeon feeding this telepathic snow created the Great Intelligence.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know. I just assumed that it existed beforehand and was controlling him.
I always assumed it existed beforehand. I always assumed it was some mystical, powerful being that we could never truly understand, like the Celestial Toymaker in a way. But just thought that was interesting. And on that, I truly have nothing left to say about this story. You can email us at thedoctor@decorativevegetable.com. Questions, comments, concerns, angry rants, love letters, your thoughts on the Great Intelligence. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and Google Play at Trust Your Doctor. Be sure to leave a rating if you like the show. And you can find us on YouTube at Decorative Vegetable.
Like us on Facebook, Trust Your Doctor. Like us on Facebook. Also check us on Twitter at TYD Podcast, and follow us on Twitter. And next time, we're watching The Bells of St. John. But until then, the end.